Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Borderwise and welcome back to From the Depths Subscriber Craft Review. Now before we get into today's review, just a quick note on the whole subscriber review thing. If you have sent in a craft to be reviewed and it has missiles on it, I highly suggest that you update or replace the blueprint you have sent. Because what with the big missile update happening the other day, a lot of designs are going to be slightly broken, so I recommend fixing that sooner rather than later. And a reminder, as ever, for all the new people, submissions for this series are closed. I am not accepting any new ones because I still have a massive list to get through, and as a lot of you have noticed by now, I'm very slow at getting through them. Just life and the video schedule is like that. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, on to the next thing, which is, Borderwise, this is just one ship. What happened to reviewing two at once? Well, the short answer is, I'm feeling slightly lazy today. The slightly longer answer is, I wanted to review a ship that had no missiles at all on it, and this particular ship, which happens to be the next immediate thing on the list, actually has a lot to talk about, because it's a lot of... Well, I'm just going to be blunt, a lot of classic mistakes, but also a few interesting things as well, that I reckon I could spend a bit of time on. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and pet frogs, I give to you the Ichor Titan by Iron Trident 00, which is, and I can't quote it because I don't remember, but to paraphrase its blurb on the workshop, it is an anti-air supercruiser. I'm not entirely sure that supercruiser is a real life classification of ships, but you know what? Supercruiser is a good description for it. So what is this thing? It is pretty expensive. It's over 300,000 materials. It is, in my book, not enormous. It's over 100 meters long. Some people think that's really big. I personally think that ships often get bigger than that. And what is it? Well, it is an anti-aircraft ship. It actually took me a while to figure it out. I needed to actually look on the workshop and see the description to realize, oh yeah, that is what it's designed for. So bear that in mind while I'm talking about it. This thing is meant to shoot at things that fly. So, what are the pros of it? Well, the guns, I do admit, are pretty good. So, here's its armament. In the front here, it has a 179mm Hesh gun. So if we go here and we access the intake, this is a squash frag. So this is a pretty potent shell. If it hits something, it does quite a bit of damage. Doesn't really care about armor that much. So let's see, explosive damage, not much, but pretty decent thump. Well, not that decent. And spalling and a lot of frag damage. So this thing does a pretty big number on a lot of things. Then it has a 440mm railgun right here, which is also squash. So this thing is inertially fused, which I should mention straight off the bat, you don't actually need for Hesh, because it tends to be crap against shields anyway, blah blah blah, old story there. But it's got a super captivation base on it, so it's super cap Hesh, which means that it can shoot through water pretty well. So removes 90% of the slowdown incurred by water, and it doesn't bounce off the water at all. Lowers the payload a bit though. So that is, to me, kind of a gun designed for shooting at hulls that are below the water. So, that's quite interesting. Over here, we have a rather interesting thing. This gun right here is Super Captivation Composite Head, which is interesting because... And this is 440. Does a lot of kinetic damage, pretty good armor piercing. I'm not sure that this can punch through armor like a regular sabot head or AP capped head can, but I don't know, it's interesting. I probably need to science that a bit. I'm told that the best kind of kinetic damage thing that you can have is an AP capped head, a bunch of sabot warheads, and like lots of gunpowder. So honestly, like if you have more gunpowder casing on here, and slightly less bow warheads, you'll actually get better armor piercing, but I'm getting into the negatives too early again. I'm going off script. Business as usual. Okay, and to finish off, it has two 200mm timed flak frag guns, which I think are really cool. So if you see here, this is the genuine issue anti-air bit of this whole deal. It is frag head, flak warhead, timed fuse, 200mm, and the flak is not amazing. It, I don't know, can strip wood blocks off, but the fragments are where it's at, and that is full 180 degrees. So honestly, I think, like, the flak is mostly for decoration, if anything else. So, that's the guns, that's what it's armed with. And so, you'll notice there's a lot of heavy armor on this thing. It's difficult to destroy completely. You're not gonna smash straight through the deck that easily, and, like, the armored deck, I think, is deliberately designed with things shooting at it from above in mind. And what else? This thing uses a PID, so despite the fact that it uses a lot of heavy armor, it doesn't sink tremendously easily. It's actually got a wet hull in here. There's no air pumps in here. So it relies entirely on the PID to keep it afloat, even though it's got a lot of space in here. More on that later. And it's, one interesting thing is that it's got a lot of props all over it, but you will see in here somewhere, let's go into build mode so we can actually see what we're doing. It has Daddy Blade steering. So these Daddy Blades right here are set up to control blocks. Dun, 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 dun. So when this thing is motoring along, so let's see here. So let's actually
receiving. Returning to formation. Moving now.
Turning like so. So you see somewhere here in the back, which way am I looking at? So you see these Daddy Blades are spinning. So that thing is going 30 meters, 30 da da da. Huh. Huh. I wonder if that's set up correctly, actually. It is turning. Well, I'm assuming that's working. Or if it doesn't work, it should work. And this is another... It's got some Daddy Blade propulsion in here, just because. It's got more Daddy Blades up here, so... Yeah, the thing is Daddy Blade propulsion, which means that even if the propellers on the back get shot off, it can still kind of go forward. And last thing... this thing takes a while to slow down, actually. Last thing to talk about is that... it has shields. It is got quite a few shields, actually. So if we go here, where's the shield? Hello, shield. There's a shield. Can you see them? There we go. So right here, you can see that it's got, well, it's got moderate shield cover, as I'd like to call it. It's not. Let's see, around here, 1, 2... Yeah, so double-layered shields for the most part all around it. So yeah, that's something we're talking about. Now, that is unfortunately it for the strong points about this craft. Like, it's still interesting design, and yeah, but one of the reasons I'm looking at this thing on its own, because it's got quite a few issues with it, so... I feel it's worth talking about it on its own. We can... Oh yeah, the shields appear to be on all the time, so that's something I missed before. Always try and have ACBs controlling your shields. I'm just gonna plop a prefab down doing that, because I don't want those shields on right now. Where's it? Where's it? Shield control. Ta-da! Shields are gone. Beautiful. Alrighty, so first things first, and God, I'm spitting all over the place. First things first, you'll notice that this thing has quite a bit of heavy armor all over it, and quite a bit of metal, and so at first glance, it looks like a pretty well armored craft. It isn't, and the reason I say that is because armor isn't just how much you use, it's where you put it and what you're using, and the armor is actually quite thin. It's thinner than it looks. So here you have heavy armor and a layer of metal, and you have, well, look at the inside. You can see it's like lots of heavy armor just randomly, well, not randomly, but here, there, and everywhere. It has right here 1, 2, oh dear. So it has a layer of metal and a layer of heavy armor, and just, it's never particularly thick. Like, the deck is 1 meter thick, admittedly heavy armor there, and here it is 2 meters of metal, which is much better, by the way. Always, like, if you, deck armor ideally should be 2 meters of something, preferably like wood if you're being cheap, alloy if you want the thing to float well, and metal if you want survivability. It's usually overkill to do anything more than that. Like, heavy armor as deck armor is just, no. You use multiple layers of metal instead. And one of the best guidelines, I think, for using heavy armor is that if you're looking at your craft from the outside, if you can see heavy armor, then you are using it wrong. This stuff is very heavy, very expensive, and yeah, it's very heavy, very expensive, vulnerable to EMP, and you actually do not want it shot at, weirdly enough. So what works well for heavy armor is having it behind something. So here you have, what the, oh dear, excessive block count as well. Like, you could, right here, using lots of 1 meter slopes, you could use instead this, which is similar thing, but lessens the block count a little bit. Yeah, you could save a lot of blocks there. So anyway, so instead of having blocks like this where like naked heavy armor is a thing, instead what you'd want to do is something along the lines of this. So here what we have is we have metal, but backed by heavy armor. And the reason why that's a good idea is that metal is a lot cheaper. But it is still quite tough, so if something gets shot out here, it'll damage and destroy the metal. Heavy armor beneath it will be fine, and metal is a lot easier to replace, a lot cheaper to replace with a repair bot. So this downslope is 10 materials. The heavy armor underneath it, these 3 meter beams, is 75, so over 3 times as expensive. Also a lot heavier. And also, if you just stick to using heavy armor on the internals, you end up using less of it. Because if you see here, instead of having heavy armor backed by metal, so here you see 1, 2 pieces of heavy armor with metal behind it, you end up using less of it if you use it internally. So let's count the blocks. So all the way down here, so here we have, let's start with where it's actually a good idea. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I knew that was going to happen, but I was committed anyway. But you get the point. So in this case, it's the same number, but I don't know what. I forget what the point I was trying to make. But basically, try not to have heavy armor visible. I know it looks cool, but if you can see it, it can get blown off, and then that's a lot for the repair bots to do. And in general, it's better just to use multiple layers of metal than heavy armor. The only reason you use heavy armor is for 2 things. One is if you have incredibly volatile components that you don't want blowing up anything else, like ammo barrels or APS cannons, and you want to essentially cordon them off from other things. Heavy armor is great for absorbing explosions. And the other reason is space. If you don't have a spare 4 meters in order to put metal down, that's when you use heavy armor. Okay, and generally all around this place there's just, well, here for instance, this is a serious weak point. It's only 2 layers of metal, and not good. And if we go to where the ammo is, which is, I remember, oi, 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 here we go. So the ammo, this is a little bit thicker. So heavy armor, metal, metal. This is a much better way to armor your craft. Over here is perhaps the best way to do it. So Heavy armor, metal, metal, that's much better, that's much more conservative and more effective, rather than just sticking heavy armor all over the place. I've waffled on too long, let's get to something else. The next thing with why this thing isn't incredibly well armored, it has kind of incomplete gun armor. So if we go to this guy here, let's see which category this falls into. So this gun here has complete armor. Well, almost complete armor. So if we see here, yeah, it's completely covered except on the underside, which, if you're stuck with it, like leaving the undersides of your guns unarmored isn't a complete disaster, I would recommend doing it anyway, because you'd be surprised how often guns get blown up from underneath, particularly by torpedoes, or by guns that are aiming below the waterline. So this is worth doing in my book, just sticking armor on the underneath of things. But otherwise, if you have no options, that's fine. What isn't fine is what's happened to... I think it's this gun in front. So there. This gun, I believe, does not have full armor and casing at all. So we go here. No, it does. Okay, which gun am I thinking of? I'm thinking of this one, I believe. Swear it was one of them. No, it was this one as well. What the hell? Making a fool out of me. Ah, stone turret neck is not actually your best idea. That is not good enough for a turret. Gosh dang it, is it these ones? Come on, come on. Don't make me the fool. Aha! I believe that's the bunny. Or not. Are all of these things armored? That doesn't make sense. Well, I lied, but, Ah, yeah, like 4 meter blocks as well. Well, with that, 1 meter blocks as well. Try not to do this. Eats your computer. I think this is the one, actually. No, it isn't. That's complete armoring. That one's just gonna sit here for a while. Okay, so guns are armored, but they could be armored a little bit better. Let's just leave it at that. And this thing doesn't really have a citadel, as I like to call it. So its squishy bits, down here, are not armored particularly well. So where is it? Where am I? I'm in the back. I'm in the bow. No, I'm in the stern. So here's where all the fun stuff... What the hell? Where is it? There it is. Okay, so there's no citadel in here. What this means is that penetration depth shells and basically any kind of armor busting thing is going to have an absolute field day shooting at this, because you see steam engines are exposed, the AI, well no, the ammunition makers, the huge amount of batteries and RTGs, the AI actually is exposed down here completely, which means that Hesh in particular does a real number on this craft. It has no spore liner, just a line of wood in here would make that a lot better. Heat, even heat that doesn't have very high penetration metrics, will shred important components. And the ammo is just wrapped in stone behind all this heavy armor, which means that Hesh will do a real number, Heat will do a real number, and it's just... there's no backup. Once the external armor is breached, that's it. And that's no good, because, well, it's kind of a bit like an egg. Once the shell's cracked, that's it, you're done. Rather than the way that I and a lot of other people tend to armor ships, which is just a little bit more like... what's a good analogy for this? Like a multi-layered coat, as in, like, if one layer gets breached, there's still another layer behind it, and it's just... yeah, you have redundancy. So armor redundancy is a very good idea. And what else, So while we're on the topic of defense, this thing is vulnerable to EMP because a lot of its structure uses heavy armor. And there's an EMP gap leading kind of straight to the AI. So the AI here sits on stone, that's fine. But over here you have repair bots touching metal, so the repair bots tend to get fried as well. Batteries also are vulnerable to EMP, so they can get EMP'd as well. Can't remember if RTGs are. They are not vulnerable to EMP, but still. And there's other things as well, like these smoke projectors. Well, smoke dispensers rather. They are touching bare metal, they will get fried. And the shields up here are also touching bare metal, so they will get fried. And basically, not a fun time for anything vulnerable in here. Also, these ACBs are also touching metal, so they'll get fried by EMP as well. So just generally more surge protectors, more small inner lining of wood. So, yeah, so basically just having an inner lining of the hull with wood or stone is a good idea for multiple reasons. Spall liner is one, and the other is that you're essentially making a Faraday cage out of your craft, which means that EMP just runs along the outside of it and doesn't penetrate inside. So yeah, worth noting. And you might have noticed it's very spacious in here. This is arguably wasted space. You could even like have thicker armor and make this whole craft a lot narrower. Because it uses PIDs anyway, you can get away with making this whole craft just a lot tighter and smaller. And yeah, that's possibly a good idea. So, well, possibly a good idea. It is a good idea. Give yourself some credit. So there's just, if you're gonna have space inside your craft, it needs to be there for a reason. It needs to be an air gap to beat heat. It needs to be for buoyancy, and I don't believe that this thing has any kind of air gap at all. Yeah, so the reason for I say that is because these props right here, these are underwater. So they can still function. I forgot what I was going to say next, but speaking of wasted things, you might have noticed that I believe the railguns on this are powered by RTGs. This is very, very expensive and wasteful. You do not want to do that if you can help it, because RTGs are expensive, but they're power inefficient for their cost. So you see this 5,000 materials for 675 electricity per second. That sounds good, but it is vastly inferior to steam production for electricity, and it's even inferior to fuel engines. So you stick a powerful fuel engine in here, it'll be a lot cheaper and it will produce energy a lot more quickly. So get rid of the RTGs. As nice as it is not having to worry about fuel or materials, it is not worth it, actually, because this craft is very expensive for what it is, and that's mostly due to the heavy armor and all the RTGs in here. And speaking of being too expensive for what it's worth, this craft has only got the 5 guns you see on top of it. It is only armed with APS. And that's, if you're only going to be armed with one thing, APS is not a bad choice, because it is still possibly the most powerful and versatile weapon in the game, but it has weaknesses. So it might have super captivation bases on 2 of the turrets, but this craft struggles against submarines. It also struggles against anything that gets, well, like submarines, anything that gets below it. Above it is fine because it's got high elevation on most of its guns. But it also struggles against craft which are very, very fast, so anything moving at Hypatos speeds or similar, it's going to struggle to shoot at. And there's also a wee bit of an over-reliance on HESH. So it's got inertial fuses on its HESH shells, and as I mentioned before, that's not a good idea because HESH doesn't need it. If it hits a shield, it's not going to do anything anyway, even if it has an inertial fuse. And if it hits the hull, it doesn't bounce off, it just explodes on contact. So, not really worth having an inertial fuse there. But this craft tends to struggle against really well-shielded craft, and that's even with shields being a lot worse than they used to be. So, worthy of consideration there is maybe just swap one of these guns. Probably, I'd suggest swapping the kinetic gun out for one that's just regular high explosive or even disruptor. That might make a bit of a difference. And one particularly egregious problem this thing has is that, particularly for an anti-aircraft vessel, it has no missile counters. So it has no decoys whatsoever, it doesn't have CWIS, and it doesn't have LAMs at all. So when you throw it against something that spams missiles like crazy... So what spams missiles like crazy? Oh well, we're going with the old favor of the Hornet's Nest. 1, 2, 3. So it's gonna do a number on these Hornet's Nests. But those missiles, there's nothing stopping them from closing in. Absolutely nothing stopping them at all. Which means that they're probably gonna blow turrets up a lot. You can see the EMP happening right there, doing work. And you'll notice that lots of stuff is getting blown off, and that is the metal around the heavy armor. So unless you've got a nice tight box of heavy armor enclosing everything, it's not really going to be that helpful. And this gun has already been knocked out. Okay, so enough of that. So missile countermeasures, especially with the missile update that's happened, they are very, very important. Missiles will ruin your day. And it's not something that you can just shrug off with armor now. Only quite small missiles can be dealt with just with armor. You really do need countermeasures of some description. And one thing that... Another problem with that is because it doesn't have a LAM system, and because this thing is slow, it is not a fast craft, cram shells have a real field day with us. So if we spawn in something that has a lot of cram... Constitution, Cauldron, Clydesdale, Argos... I think the Poseidon. Let's see how that goes. Well, Poseidon's probably gonna die very quickly, but... Okay, wrong one. Alright, Poseidon was a bad example. That was a lot of crams. I mean a lot of crams. I want lots of crams here. Asgard, Pioneer. Chancellor, Warrior. Crams, damn it. Okay. Great Talons. Cram thing. Nasher. I like the Nasher. It's like an Adrastos, but not. So you see, no missile defense, that's a problem. Nothing to stop that cram coming through. And ours has been blown off slightly. Although it's still winning, there's still the APS is still doing decently good job. Yeah, you probably get the idea there, that crams will... Actually, no, let's actually spawn in something that has good crams. And by that, I mean, let us spawn in one of my things. Hello, Beast. How you doing? So, slow, doesn't move erratically. No lambs, that's an issue. See, that is massive holes right there. And especially if you, like, just, it blows the metal off. Heavy armor is still fine, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. So these, so especially penetration depth crams, if they get through the metal, that's a problem. That is a big problem indeed. Okay, enough of that. We get the idea there. So one thing you immediately notice is that also, despite the shielding, the guns are quite exposed on this deck. And it's hard to stop that, but what does help weirdly enough, is superstructure. And you tend to find that the lower set your guns are, and if there are higher bits on the ship, for some weird reason they just get hit less. Partially because the enemy craft are more likely to aim for the superstructure than the turrets, and also because it just means you can stick shields and stuff on them, or even just build a roof over the guns. So you might consider sticking a tower in the middle here with the lambs nodes on it, or something similar, or even just extra shields. That might be a way to essentially, well, literally shielding these guns, especially these 4 guns around the middle, from incoming fire. And this thing is a repair monster, so it's taken a bit of damage, and you'll notice that it's ticking through materials now quite fast. Partially that's because it's got a steam engine, but also because it's made mostly of heavy armor. It's got a bunch of repair bots, it repairs quickly, and so it eats your money. That's not a good thing. You want more active defenses and less reliance on repair. I will crow this until the day I die because I learned that the hard way with my designs. In fact, this design reminds me a lot of my older design. It's got that kind of V-shaped hull, it's got the pointy bits. Well, a very pointy stern, lots of wasted space on the inside, so, like, Iron Trident, I've been there. I've made ships like this, but, like, I gotta tell you, it's more effective not to, and just essentially make a box that's pointier at one end, and try and fill up the innards as much as you can. And another thing to mention is that if you go to the detection on here, which is somewhere, actually let's just despawn you and spawn in another one. So, detection. So, this is, well, another one thing bearing average time is, well, actually this is fine for APS. For crams this would suck, but this is fine. And you'll notice that camera, reflection sensor, camera, blah 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 blah, no sonar. Now, this is an anti-aircraft vessel, so that's not a huge problem, but it is worth sticking just at the very least a passive sonar on your craft, so it can see things below the waterline, because once something is in the water, it doesn't matter that this craft has super captivation shells, it can't see them to shoot at them, which is a bit of an issue. It doesn't have a wireless snooper either, so that's not going to help either. And one last thing is where the layout of the innards of the ship. So here we have ammunition, I believe. Yeah, so here's the ammo. Where are we? We are in the back. 2 separate ammo compartments. Yeah, and again, single blocks, not a good idea. Treat your PC right. Use beams today. And so the... Okay, so the points for putting it at the back, that is the smart thing. Slightly less points, and I want to talk because I do this, is putting it below one of the turrets. Because when this thing gets shot at from above, what happens is that, particularly when this thing fights airships like the Erie or the Moray, what happens is that this gun gets destroyed, and then there's a nice convenient hole straight through into the squishy innards and down into even more squishy innards down here. So that's not so good. So ideally the design for an anti-aircraft ship should be the guns are all somewhere near the front, the ammo is way near the back, it's got an armored deck, so not like this, preferably multiple layers of metal, and the gun should have as much freedom to traverse as possible. So yeah, like there isn't really a ship I can show off that is like that, but... no, actually there is a kind of. It's a monitor I made ages ago. It's something like this. It is much smaller, cheaper than the thing. What was it? Let's spawn in the Nasher again. My ship isn't gonna win because it's it's a lot cheaper than this. But it is worth showing off just to give you a kind of idea of what an AA ship should look like. So here it is. Like the Viperid, the Colibrid, and the Elipid all basically the same ship, they're all just using slightly different ammo. So we're gonna spawn this guy, Steel Striders, And the main thing is, the important stuff is at the front, the AI is at the back. And it is reasonably dodgy. And missile countermeasures. Very important. Oh god. Yeah, I mentioned my ship is gonna lose because I hate advanced cannons. Although this thing appears to be... Why is it flying backwards down into hell? That's weird. That's interesting. Ah, been immobilized. Well, that sucks. Let's do that. Let's try that again. But let's show you what I'm talking about. So, for future reference, AA craft. Something like this tends to work, at least somewhat. Oh my god, the missile... Stop ignoring my countermeasures, you bastard! Rude! Come on! Really? Rude! Rude! Very rude. Okay. So, when it actually works, ammo way at the back, guns at the front. Don't put your guns over your ammo for an anti-aircraft ship. Great, fine. Sorry, I got salty for absolutely no reason. So, back to the ship we're actually meant to talk about. Ichor Titan is that I actually kind of like this thing, mostly because of the nostalgia it triggers. I remember I've made a few ships with this kind of pointy V-shaped hull, like deck covered in guns. It actually reminds me a little bit of the Skilla, actually. Let's put them side by side. Let's put them side by side because that's so fun. So ships, retired craft. Yes, I've retired most of my craft because I'm not happy with them. I feel that I've upgraded them as far as I'm able and willing. So some of the story is just nice and pointy, V-shape on the bottom, and deck covered in guns. So, well done, Iron Trident, we have similar tastes, or had similar tastes. So, all in all, just basically armor smarter, not harder. Remember to have a bit of redundancy and versatility in weaponry, armor your guts, and have active defenses for missiles, because that's important, even though apparently they don't always work. So, let's get the Skilla nice and out of shot, go away. So, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you, Iron Trident 00, for sending the ship in. Like, sorry it took a very long time to get around to it, that is the ball game, it seems. So thank you all so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I will see you next time in From the Depths Subscriber Craft Review. Farewell! Is that a man on the front there?